On these two maps you can see Burundi, a small landlocked country in the heart of Africa. With a population estimated at around 12 million, Burundi is one of the most densely populated countries in Africa. In the next few minutes, I will talk about the Second Civil War and its impact on coffee farming both locally and globally. Before colonization, the area then known as Burundi was a well-organized kingdom, home to three main ethnic groups: the Hutu, the Tutsi, and the Twa. In this era, there were no significant ethnic tensions, as all groups pledged loyalty to the same monarchy, shared a common religion, language, culture, and lived together in relative harmony. When colonialists first tried to take control, they met strong resistance from the Burundian people, and many of the initial missionaries were killed. In response, the colonizers adopted a strategy to weaken the existing governance, favoring the Tutsis, who they claimed were first-class citizens. They implemented divide and rule policies which sowed the seeds of future ethnic divisions. Burundi was one of the last regions in Africa to come under European colonial rule, largely due to its difficult accessibility and remote location. Initially, Germany administered Burundi for a relatively brief period. After Germany's defeat in the First World War, the Belgians took over and administered the territory through indirect rule until the country's independence. Since gaining independence from Belgium in 1962, Burundi has faced instability and ethnic violence between the Hutu and Tutsi. After the independence, Tutsi officers took power from 1966, leading to decades of Tutsi-dominated rule, suppression of Hutu uprisings, and the First Burundian Genocide. In 1988, under international pressure, Burundi began moving towards democracy. A new constitution brought in multi-party politics after 2 decades of Tutsi rule. In 1993, Melchior Ndadaye, who was the first Hutu head of state, won the elections, leading to the formation of a power-sharing government. 3 months after his election, Ndadaye was assassinated by the Tutsi extremist army in 1993. This sparked a civilian war between the Tutsi army and radical Hutu groups. Numerous civilians formed local militias to defend themselves, but these groups soon got engaged in the conflict as well, carrying out attacks on each other. As more civilians were getting involved in the process, it became clear that the country was getting into a civil war. Street gangs received money and guns from extremist Hutu and Tutsi politicians and were contributing to this ethnic war. Around 50,000 and 100,000 people died within a year. Burundi's next president, also a Hutu, was killed in a plane crash a few months later in 1994, together with Rwanda's president. They were returning from a conference that was held in Tanzania. The objective of the conference was to end ethnic bloodletting in Burundi. This killing set off the more known Rwandan genocide of 1994. The successful Arusha peace agreement signed in the year 2000 in Arusha, Tanzania, aimed at ending the civil war in Burundi. Nelson Mandela took over as chief mediator. Despite the agreement, occasional violence still continued, with some rebel groups not immediately signing on to the deal. It was not until 2003 that an influential Hutu rebel group agreed to a ceasefire agreement, subsequently integrating into the coalition government. This integration process included selecting soldiers from both the existing Burundian armed forces and the Hutu rebel group to form a new unified national army. After the president enacted a law to form the new national army in January 2005, Burundi had its first vote since 1994, approving the constitution. Parliamentary elections were conducted peacefully and efficiently, resulting in a victory for the FDNB, the former Hutu rebel group. The outlook in Burundi continued to improve when the final rebel group, the FNL, agreed to a ceasefire, marking a definitive end to the 12-year civil war. Estimates claim it has cost the lives of approximately 300,000 people. It has transformed the lives of millions of people in many aspects. To understand the impact of the civil war on coffee farming, we have to look back in the 1970s, where Burundi's economy was growing at a similar rate as an average sub-Saharan African country. In the 80s, the growth was even 3 times higher as the sub-Saharan average. This upward trend was dramatically reversed by the 1993 civil war. According to a study, Burundi's GDP per capita dropped by about $140 each year during the civil war. compared to what it might have been without the conflict. This implies that the average Burundian's annual income was nearly halved due to the war. The war cost nearly $10 billion for the entire country. Agriculture, the backbone of the economy, took a major hit. The rural population, unable to tend to their fields amidst the crisis, either fled the conflict or were hindered by casualties and injuries. This led to a marked decrease in the production of both food and cash crops, notably coffee and tea. Civil war often impacts poor, rural communities the most. Over 85% of the population is engaged in agriculture, mostly at a subsistence level. Coffee, as Burundi's principal natural resource, is vital to its economy, making up more than 80% of annual export earnings. It provides a lot of cash income to farmers and also state revenue. When the Civil War began in 1993, many farmers started replacing their coffee trees with food crops. This change was mainly to tackle food shortages and to reduce the government's income from coffee. Studies show that if a family was affected by the war, they were 16 to 18% less likely to grow coffee after the war. In 1996, 6 African nations imposed economic sanctions on Burundi. These sanctions blocked the import of essential supplies for coffee cultivation and stopped coffee exports. Coffee exports fell dramatically. This cut the government's earnings and farmers' incomes, leading to a rise in illegal coffee exports to neighboring countries. Burundi remains one of the poorest countries in the world. Despite the civil war's end in 2005, it continues to face significant human rights challenges, especially since the 2015 political crisis. The ethnic violence may have declined, but political problems still make it hard for the citizens to live a decent life.